In Dostoevsky's Notes from the Underground, we meet this rather interesting character, who, for lack of a better term, we can only call the Underground Man. Dostoevsky gives us no name. He is, of course, one of the most dyspeptic, unlovely people that you could ever meet in literature. Were he to exist in real life, we would have to give him a name, and the name is probably Friedrich Nietzsche. Not that Dostoevsky was thinking of Nietzsche when he wrote this, but everything we see in the Underground Man, we could almost see in Nietzsche, but most particularly his loathing of the very simple premise. Twice two makes four. For the Underground Man, what did this mean? It meant, in particular, that there is a reality to which I am obligated, and I don't like reality. We can see this in other of Dostoevsky's short stories, see it in others of his stories as well. Right now, I'm trying to finish The Idiot, which I just found enthralling. But we see this in White Nights, a man who completely was devoid of any notion about what reality and sensibility was, well, until he met the girl, and of course the dream of the silly man, the ridiculous man. But Nietzsche, why did Nietzsche not like twice two makes four? Well, it's not the mathematical equation he was carping about. For Nietzsche, and we see this in most of his works, we see it in the Gay Science, right? Where basically he rails against what is commonly called Wissenschaft, the idea of study, the idea of investigation, which we could just call, well, we won't call it anything because in some ways it's a word that's difficult to translate. Some people translate it as science. But this isn't what Nietzsche was actually talking about in the Gay Science, right? Der Freiliche Wissenschaft. He was talking about poetry. Poetry would be the true Wissenschaft. And he picks up this term, the gay endeavor, the gay science, the gay knowledge. He picks it up probably from, it's first used actually by the 16th century doctor and friar Francois Rabelais. And Rabelais, of course, is referring to the troubadours. And the troubadours, of course, were people interested in love poetry. There's an immense amount to say about the troubadours. A lot written on them. There is a very big link between them, not so much Nietzsche as Nietzsche's one-time friend, Richard Wagner. But why do I elaborate on these things? Why do I talk about this way? For Nietzsche, science, as we think of it, Wissenschaft in its modern form, hid life. It dulled our senses to what life really was, the harshness of it, the brutality of it. For Nietzsche, Wissenschaft, science, was a dead end for life. Why do I say that? In Nietzsche's writings, as we go through his writings, one of the things that we find is that he basically had come to a point where he saw the whole world, all right, the whole world as struggle. And it was a constant struggle of the weak many, against the very powerful few. And the very powerful few, however, were the ones who actually gave life meaning. Why? Because they alone could exercise the will to power. In Nietzsche's mind, there is a clear link between the ancient Greek poets and their decadence, their collapse, let us say, with Euripides towards the end of the 5th century BC. The weakening of the place of the chorus in Greek tragedy, and the rise, on the other hand, of that gutter snipe, Socrates. Socrates and Plato, in Nietzsche's minds, were emblematic of Greek decadence and Greek decline, whereas the tragedy, and he talks about this in his first book, The Birth of Tragedy, tragedy was actually a conflict itself, a conflict between the Dionysian spirit, the spirit of life, the spirit of revelry, of bacchanals, right? The spirit of Dionysus on one hand, and that of Apollo, the plastic, the contrived, on the other. And initially he sees this tension as actually a good thing, but eventually he comes to see it not as a good thing, but as, well, leading to decadence. And eventually, I should note, he replaces Apollo. What does he do? He instead inserts Christianity. Nietzsche thought of himself as the Antichrist. He's not the Übermensch. He makes this clear. The Übermensch are one of the great and powerful, and the Übermensch was the one who was actually going to come to bring history meaning. Well, who was the Übermensch? Well, he talks about this in Also Sprach Zarathustra, when he gives us the parable of the 3 Metamorphoses. Reading from Also Sprach Zarathustra. Thus spake Zarathustra. This is one of Zarathustra's speeches. Zarathustra himself is a wildly interesting character. He travels the earth with a wise serpent and this eagle as well. He laughs, he jests, he jokes, but he also informs us about Nietzsche's ideas. Of the 3 metamorphoses of the spirit, I tell you how the spirit becomes a camel, the first metamorphosis. The camel a lion, and the lion finally a child. There is much that is difficult for the spirit, the strong, reverent spirit that would bear much. But the difficult and the most difficult are what its strength demands. What is difficult? Asks the spirit that would bear much and kneels down like a camel, wanting to be well loaded. What is most difficult of heroes? Asks the spirit that would bear much, that I may take it upon myself and exult in my strength. Is it not humbling oneself to wound one's holiness, letting one's folly shine to mock one's wisdom? Or is it this, parting with our cause when it triumphs, climbing high mountains to tempt the tempter? Or is it this, feeding on the acorns and grass of knowledge, and for the sake of the truth, suffering hunger in one's soul? He goes on. All these most difficult things the spirit that would bear much takes upon itself, like the camel that burdened speeds into the desert. Thus the spirit speeds into the desert. In the loneliest desert, however, the second metamorphosis occurs. Here the spirit becomes a lion who would conquer his freedom and be master in his own desert. Here he seeks out his last master. He wants to fight him, his last god. For ultimate victory, he wants to fight the great dragon. Who is the great dragon whom the spirit will no longer call Lord and God? Thou shalt. Thou shalt is the name of the dragon. But the spirit of the lion says, I will. Thou shalt lies in his way, sparkling like gold, an animal covered with scales, and on every scale shines a golden. Thou shalt values values, thousands of years old, shine on these scales, and thus speaks the mightiest of all dragons. All value of all things shines on me. All value has long been created, and I am all created value. Verily, there shall be no more I will. Thus speaks the dragon. My brother, Zarathustra continues, why is there need in the spirit for the lion? Why is not the beast of burden, which renounces and is reverent enough to create new values that even the lion cannot do? But the creation of freedom for oneself for new creation, that is within the power of the lion. In other words, me now speaking, the lion will sweep the decks of all values, the Apollonian values of Greek culture, of Plato and Socrates, right? Of Socrates, who basically says what? That virtue leads to the good, which leads to happiness. No, that has to be pushed aside. Of Christ, love thy neighbor as thyself. Pray for your enemies, do good to them, which, right, all of this value has to be pushed away. The lion cannot create the new value, but he can clear the decks. The creation of freedom for oneself and a sacred no, even to duty. For that, my brothers, the lion is needed. To assume the right to new values, that is the most terrifying assumption for a reverent spirit that would bear much. Verily to him it is praying and a matter for a beast to pray. He once loved, thou shalt, as most sacred. Now he must find illusion and caprice, even in the most sacred, that freedom from his love may become his prey. The lion is needed for such prey. But say, my brothers, what can the child do, the last metamorphosis, that even the lion could not do? Why must the praying lion, P-R-E-Y, praying lion, still become a child? The child of innocence and forgetting, a new beginning, a game, a self-propelled wheel, a first movement, a sacred yes. For the game of creation, my brother, a sacred yes is needed. The spirit now wills his own will, and he who had been lost to the world now conquers his own world. Of three metamorphoses of the spirit I have told you, how the spirit became a camel, and the camel a lion, and the lion, finally, child. Thus spake Zarathustra, and at that time he sojourned in the town that is called the Motley Cow. For Nietzsche, there needed to be a transvaluation of values. In his book, Beyond Good and Evil, Nietzsche is saying, let us return to a time before ethics, before there was Socrates, when the question was not between good and evil, moral qualities, but between the good and the bad, the weak and the strong. Let us return to the period of the Trojan War. Not that we would say he was really reading Homer very well, but for Nietzsche, we needed to get beyond these categories of morality, good and evil, because only then could the will to power triumph. Only then could we stop the triumph of the weak in the herd. Who are the weak in the herd? They're the Christians, whether medieval Christians or modern Christians, like in his mind George Eliot, who, even though denying Christianity, nonetheless still imported all sorts of Christian morality into life. Nietzsche loathed this stuff. He loathed Carlyle. He loathed Arnold. He loathed, right, all these individuals. He loathed German culture. For Nietzsche, then, the morality of the slave. And here, whom he means in particular, and this is from the Genealogy of Morality, probably. I mean, it's hard to say one book is more important than the other, but the Genealogy of Morality certainly falls into this. In the Genealogy of Morality, basically Nietzsche says the powerful are triumphant. Who are the powerful? The Assyrians, the Babylonians. Who are they powerful over? The slave nation of the Jews. But what happens? For Nietzsche, the Jews create the Ten Commandments. The Jews create the Levitical law. The Jews create all of the laws and the precepts by which they basically said, yes, we have been conquered, we have been subjugated, we've been made slaves, but guess what? We're still better than you because we have the truth of morality and you are nothing but a bunch of idolatrous Gentiles. This same mentality then overcomes. How? It overcomes first and foremost through Christ, the dying God, but more importantly, through that epileptic, fit-induced apostle, Paul. This is Nietzsche's thought, all right? But let us hasten to the denouement of why I'm making this video. First and foremost, it has to do with how do we now look at Nietzsche as orthodox, right? How do we look at him? How do we look at him, the irrationalist, right, who basically thought reason a mistake, right? Reason brings us Plato, Aristotle. The whole idea of knowing the good is to do the good, is to lead to happiness. For the Orthodox Christians, the center of our life is the Word. Since Nietzsche is a classicist, I shall use the classical pronunciation. Logos, right? Logos, the Word of God, is the center of our life. Nietzsche, of course, was an atheist, or at least practically so, and he certainly was an immoralist. For Nietzsche, it's not that his system is without consistency, but the consistency of his system is built into the whole idea that power rules over all, and that these monks, these slaves, were themselves exercising power by their use of ethics and asceticism and even aesthetics. That was their power. And we see this so often, even in modern times, that everything is a struggle for power. The whole idea of humility, the whole idea of self-denial, right? This has gone to the wall. And Nietzsche, of course, is kind of the ringleader of this. But of course, the problem with this is, if everything is just a quest for power, we've made power such an elastic term that any quest is a quest for power. And this is also very much a problem with modern critical theory. Modern critical theory largely sees everything as a quest for power. Ultimately, there is no room for love. What is love? In the most simple term, love is benevolent disinterest. If I love you, I cannot act towards you with, oh, if I bake them a pie, maybe they'll invite me over to eat some of it, or maybe they'll do something for me. That's not love. That's not love. That's bargaining. That's calculation. Love is abandonment of self. And this is something Nietzsche did not understand, or I don't know that he understood it. On the 6th of January in 1889, he was on the streets of Turin, and he came upon a man beating a donkey, and he snaps. Why? I postulated in a paper at a conference some years ago that he snaps because he suddenly had pity on this poor beast of burden, this unthinking slave. He throws his arms around the donkey to stop the master from beating it. This is probably, I don't want to say the only Christian thing that Nietzsche ever did. But perhaps at that moment, his complete idea about what life was crashed in a moment of compassion. And it broke his mind. His mind certainly was broken. For Orthodox Christians, therefore, the philosophy of Nietzsche is almost antithetical to what we believe. He's incredibly interesting to read. He does have a great many just criticisms of modern European culture. But ultimately, his prescriptions for what ailed European culture were completely vile. The whole idea of the will to power, the whole idea actually of meaninglessness, his idea of the eternal recurrence, which the Übermensch was supposed to break us out of, is quite simply this. Everything that has happened will happen again, and will yet happen again, and will yet happen again. If that is true, there's nothing unique about this moment, about me here talking to the camera and putting it up on YouTube. There's nothing unique about it at all. In fact, it's meaningless because it'll just happen again and again and again. Nietzsche could actually never get out of this problem. There are many other problems in Nietzsche, but this is the very problem that we as Orthodox Christians see fulfilled, and it's all stated there in Acts 17 when St. Paul at the Areopagus says, God himself has appointed a day when he will judge the world by this man, Jesus, whom he has guaranteed by raising him from the dead. I might be just shading that a little bit, but the whole point was history has an end, and it ends in being judged by Christ. This is what Nietzsche rejects. This is what the Greeks rejected. The Epicureans and the Stoics there at Marseille, they rejected the fact that Christ was going to judge the world. They rejected the fact that history ends, and it ends because of the resurrection from the dead, that death can be escaped. This is what they rejected, and in a sense, this is exactly what Nietzsche wants to reject as well. He wants to reject truth, the beginning of Beyond Good and Evil. He asks this question, what after all if truth is a woman? He doesn't mean this in the same sense in which Boethius has philosophy as a lady philosophia. That's not what he means, right? Nietzsche was one of the great misogynists of history, right? For Nietzsche, men were made for war and women were made for men. He never got married. Anyway, Christianity rejects, full stop, the idea that we cannot know truth. We can know truth because God has revealed it, right? God is the Lord and hath revealed himself unto us, right? That we sing every Matins. So for Orthodox Christians, this is the real telling point for Nietzsche, the rejection of truth, the rejection that the center of reality is the Logos of God, the Word of God, our God incarnate Christ, and that love is the highest ideal, not the will to power, but love. Love. Love is the fulfillment of all the commandments. Love is why Christ comes, to redeem us poor, vile sinners, right? Love is self-emptying. Nietzsche never understood this. I hope you all have enjoyed this. Please leave your comments. And of course, I hope to come back. I think I am going to actually talk a great deal about the troubadours, the whole notion of what the troubadours were about, how this links in even with modern culture, especially modern notions of love. What's the relationship of the Christological heresy of the medieval Manichees to the troubadours? There is much here to talk about this, and I hope that I get to it sooner than I got to this one. Anyway, Christ is among us to his grace and love for mankind. Thank you.